Nate, we're here today talking about what we want to do with our first round picks if we're not drafting with them. I think too often we go into the mindset once we get these first round picks that it's automatically the best process to draft every single player. But in reality, we have to be, fluid with the pick. It's such a valuable piece that you can do a lot with. So if we're looking to trade out or trade down, what are we looking to get today? Let's start right off the rip with the 101, the biggest big ticket item in this draft. Bijan Robinson, essentially across the board. What are you doing with the 101 if you are not drafting with it?
Yeah, so with the 101, quite honestly, in most cases, I don't want to trade away the 101. It's going to have to take something that's going to get me excited to trade away the 101. Ideally, I would like multiple first round picks. I would like some true production that I know I'm going to be getting back into the NFL. And so with that, if I can't get 2+ first round picks, and when I say 2, I mean like if I was settling for 2 first round picks, I want 2 early first round picks, like pretty early first round picks, probably like the 103 and the 105. But, if I can't just start getting more and more picks with the 101, if I have to go after players, then if I don't need a running back, I think a good situation to trade away from the 101 would be trade away the 101 for Dak Prescott and Jerry Jeudy. I know this isn't the most exciting trade, maybe. There are more exciting names out there, and I think those would be great names to target. But I think at the end of the day, this is more realistic of what you're going to be able to get with the 101 because exciting names are hard to trade for. That's just how it goes. So I think Dak Prescott and Jerry Jeudy are 2 guys that right now are not at peak value. And I think Dak is being looked at a little wrongly because we look at the real NFL world and not just fantasy football, where Dak Prescott's still a good quarterback. And then Jerry Jeudy, there is a lot of worries about the Broncos offense this year. But hey, Nathaniel Hackett's out, Sean Payton's in. I expect things to get better.
One thing I really want to touch on that you noted, anytime we talk about moving the first or a real top tier asset, like a Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Bijan Robinson in this case, I think #bars. I think that it's very important to note what you said was that not moving late first round picks or not taking late first round picks. You need to be moving picks that you feel are pretty secure, going to be worse picks or in this case, better picks, worse teams, better picks in the draft. Because honestly, if you move the Jamar Chase for 3 late first round picks, what does that really do for your team? So if you're moving a high level asset like this, make sure you're getting those high quality pieces in return. For me, at the 101, if I'm moving off Bijan, like you said too, I want to make sure I'm securing at least one piece that is, I feel, a secure asset in the NFL already that isn't going to lose value quickly. So for me, I went with Garrett Wilson and a 24 first. This gives you upside for the future and upside right now. And it's what I feel is a secure player in Garrett Wilson right off the rip. One piece that at least I'm certain is a sure thing. And that 24 first, I can do something similar with next year. I can always trade out. I can use that to trade for a piece if I end up being somehow competitive, even though I was the 101. I don't want to assume every worst team in the league is the team that actually got the 101. Teams trade for it midseason. That pick could be anyone's pick. Mm-hmm. I do think at the 101, you have to evaluate yourself to see, where is this really going? Are you a Bijan Robinson and a couple pieces away, or are you worlds away? Like there's a good reason you were the 101 and you need to move off and you need to get multiple assets in return to really start building out and flushing out your roster, as opposed to, putting a diamond in a crap field kind of a thing. Like, is that the case with your team, or are you actually a team that's a Bijan Robinson plus a couple assets away from really competing?
When you have the 101, something like that is so valuable, you got to make sure you're getting peak value out of it. At worst, I think Dak Prescott and Jerry Jeudy, if you don't need a running back, you need other places in your position, in your lineup to strengthen. I think that's a good trade to make your team better. But you should be able to get more, I think, with the 101 in most leagues, especially the closer we get to the draft.
So let's talk about the next pick in the draft, the biggest tier break of tier breaks. Not really, but it is a clear tier break between 101 and 102. What are you looking to do with your 102 if you are not drafting with it, Nate?
Yeah, so with the 102, at the 102 in most places, I'm either looking at quarterback in a super flex league, or I'm looking at Jahmyr Gibbs in a super flex league, or one quarterback league, depending on my quarterback situation. If I'm moving off this pick, I want, once again, guaranteed NFL production. So that's why I'm going after Josh Jacobs, Josh Jacobs is still young. I know he's a free agent this year. Whether or not it's with the Raiders or with a different team, I think he's going to have quite the workload. I think he's going to continue to be a really, really good fantasy player for another couple, 2-3 years. So I'm okay with that lateral move. And with that, I think trading down from the 102, you can trade down and get Josh Jacobs. So what I'm saying is I'm going to move the 102 for Josh Jacobs and a very early second round pick. I put the 201 here, maybe the 202. Maybe we're literally just trading down a whole round from the 102 to the 202, and we're getting Josh Jacobs in the midst of it. And I think this is a great trade to keep that draft pick. Obviously, we're going to get less talent with a second round pick than the first round pick. But we're acquiring Josh Jacobs, who's an absolute stud, into our lineups, who people are devaluing because he's an older running back, and I get it. But Josh Jacobs, he's a talented guy. I think we definitely have 2, maybe 3 more years of elite production out of him.
I like that move a lot. I don't have much to add this time around. But for me, if you're at the 202, the 102 or the 103, so this is kind of blanketed over the next 2 picks for me because you're in, I think we can agree, a tier in 102 and 103. And then we see another one right after that at 104 and 105. But I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. If at this point in a super flex draft, you have quarterbacks are arguably still the most valuable, even if you don't feel good about the quarterbacks in this draft. So if you don't need a quarterback right now, instead of drafting, JSN or Jahmyr Gibbs, if you don't need a quarterback right now, I'm trying to maximize the value on that pick and move back to 104 or 105. And I think moving out of this tier, you can really push for a 24 first in return. So my deal is a 102 for the 105 and a 24 first. I'm willing to, and that's purely situational too, if you don't need a quarterback here. I'm willing to kind of pass up, like you said, on the guaranteed production in the NFL at this point, because I think you're still getting similar players, and what you're trying to do with that pick is you're still kind of a horse apiece either way, because you're either drafting a player that's not as secure as a Bijan Robinson, or you're moving down to get a better piece in terms of making the most of the quarterback value you're passing up on. Because there is actually a pretty interesting gap of like really good quarterbacks, but that value falls in between 101 and 102, in my opinion. Yeah. Just a very interesting, everybody kind of in the back of the top 12. Like Dak is one of those that is just worth a little less than the 101, but there's a lot of guys around him too that are just a little less worth it, but far more worth the 102 and 103. But if I do need a quarterback and I'm looking to trade for somebody, I'd be willing to do something like moving the 102 or the 103 for somebody like Daniel Jones, as long as he re-signs with the Giants. I don't want him not with Brian Daboll, plus a 24 first on top, because I think he is pretty lowly valued, even though he did come off a really good season, working with no weapons. I mean, Isaiah Hodgins, Wan'Dale Robinson at peaks of what players were on this team during the season. And obviously you have Saquon there too, who helps him out in other ways. But I'd be willing to look at that if I need a quarterback and I don't feel good about the quarterbacks here. I struggle with what you can realistically target with that 102. Like, yeah, I'd love to go get Trevor Lawrence. Even a Tua, I think you probably can't get right now with that 102 or 103. Maybe you can push for that. Maybe in the draft, maybe somebody's that low where you can push for something like that. I'd be pretty surprised. That's where I'm at on 102 / kind of 103. I'm kind of in the same boat with these next 2 picks here. But Nate, I'd love to hear what you're thinking for 103.
Yeah, for the 103, I actually have the same tree that you wrote down. I think this is the same thing where this is the tier. We're dropping down to the next tier, the bottom of the next tier, because we'll pick up whatever we can get. So I have trading down from the 103 for the 105 and a 24 first. So same idea that you had with the 102 there. If we're going to trade out of this tier, I'd like to trade just a couple spots down and add that first. I think it might be a hard sell, but once we get on the draft board, I don't think it'll be that hard of a sell.
If 105 or 104 even really needs a quarterback and they're just salivating over Bryce Young, I think that's a pretty easy move they make to make sure they secure that, because they don't know what 104 is doing. They need to move up to get past them. And
the key here is the 105 has to not like Will Levis or Anthony Richardson.
Yes, correct. At least at that value.
Yeah. Because if they like those guys at the 105, then they might not be willing to move up to the 105 for a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud. For the next pick here, though, Bob. So for the 104, we're doing the same thing here. I'm trading down in draft picks. I'm just trying to acquire more draft capital. Bob, I think you always say something that's makes a lot of sense in Dynasty fantasy football, or actually just in general in life. If you're trading one thing, try to get 2 things back. Always a good plan. Always a good strategy. So here with the 105, I'm going to trade down to the 108, which I think is kind of that next tier. So I'm trading down to the 108, and I'm going to acquire the 110 too. So I'm going to move up into the middle of the first round for 2 mid to late firsts. And I think, once again, this might not work out in a trade calculator, but once you start putting names to these picks, I think this is what makes sense. There's a lot of times that as dynasty players, we hold on to first round picks, but during the offseason, it's kind of the time to do it because they are valuable. And, if you can't sell this right now, you probably can sell it later. And that's the key.
Yeah.
You have 3-4 months until your rookie draft, maybe 5, depending on if it's in August. And you can use this time to let your picks just grow in value until you can make this trade. Or maybe you move that 110 and maybe you get a player of a similar value that you're happy with.
Yeah, I think just now you touched on a major point of why I wanted to do this video, which was, I think a big part of Dynasty and good practice is just maximizing on value. Yeah. And I think right now we are at the point in this cycle where draft picks are king because they're the next sexy thing coming around. Everybody's hyped for this draft. Everybody loves this draft for the most part. And I think at some point, it's just best practice to take advantage of what everybody else is willing to pay for first round picks instead of sometimes drafting the player makes the most sense. There are going to be times on the board where just draft Bijan, don't overthink it. There's going to be times on the board where it's just draft JSN, don't overthink it, whatever the case is. But I think trading down, maximizing value in any way, because in all honesty, if you can't move that 104 for a high end asset, you might be able to move the 108 and the 110 for a higher end asset, just, with the next pick, especially if players slide it, you're on board. And then you can go throw these at, just to throw out a random name, like a T. Higgins, like a Garrett Wilson, like one of these budding young players that, hey, man, somebody might be looking to split assets 1 into 2, diversify the roster a little bit. There might be 2 players on the board or 3 players on the board that they really like yet, that they're like, well, man, I love making this deal right now. And that's, like I said, just 2 names. Chris Olave, I think, is probably a more realistic name than those 2, in all honesty, to try to target with those 2 picks.
It's important to remember that just because you trade it, the 104 for the 108 and 110, someone else might value those 2 picks to be the equivalent of the 102 or something of that. Just because you set that market value doesn't mean that that value stays with every single person. You might be able to move those 2 picks for, like you said, like a better play you might not have been able to get for the 104. Very important to realize, it's not a linear progression of value.
Yes. I love that you noted that, because the second a trade is made, while it sets some precedent, it's still a fluid value, because like you said, other players will look at that trade and be like, wow, like he got that much for that, or he got that little for that, or like, wow, that 108 and 110 should have gotten you way more than 104 kind of a thing. And then you can go make a move off that. I love that point, because that is so true that, at the end of the day, trade values are subjective. What you think a player or piece or assets or group of assets is worth could be totally different from somebody else. And again, this is where you take advantage of that one way or the other. Moving on to what I'm doing with this pick, in my opinion, another tier at 104/105. A bit of a trade down spot, I'll say. However you look at it in Superflex, the top 5 picks will likely consist of 3 tiers, that being 101, 102, and 103, and 104 and 105. If you're hoping to snag Gibbs or a top quarterback, there should still be one at the 104. However, if there isn't an option that you prefer, this is a great spot to trade out of the 104 for Josh Jacobs and a 24 third. As you mentioned already, trading for Josh Jacobs, perennially undervalued. I'm not going to, bang the drum for him too hard this time. This is another piece where in one of the audits we just did recently, me and Zach did recently, a guy in the league has the 104 and he was being offered Travis Etienne for that pick. Another player that you could possibly throw out a pick for, a guy that could be soured on in some aspects. The draft picks are so diverse and multifaceted in how you can use them. I think it's bad practice almost to relegate yourself to just being on the draft board and drafting a player. But with all that said, Nate, let's roll right into pick 105. What are you doing here with this pick?
Yeah, with the 105, I'm trading down again but staying in the first round. I think it's important in this draft class. There's a lot of talent in the first round. And if we can stay in the first round, I'm all about it. Because once we get into the second round, while there are guys I like at value in the second round, and there's some guys I get excited about, the hit rate once we get out of the first round, I really do think there's like a top 12 prospects in this draft class. And once we get out of that tier, I just don't feel as safe about some of these guys. So I'd like to stay in the first if possible. So I am trading back from the 105 to the 108. Like I said before, this is kind of that next tier. And instead of grabbing a late first like I did with the last pick. I'm going to be grabbing an early 24 second. I'm still getting a player this year. I'm giving myself some draft capital in the next year's draft, spreading it among the 2 years. Once again, trading one asset for two assets, helping myself out 2 different seasons. I think this is just a good move just to help your team out. If you're trying to make a run this year, this might not be the trade to make. If there's a player at the 105 that you need for your starting lineup, it's not the time to trade down, especially if you're going to get draft capital next year. You need that play. You want to win a championship. You got to get your money. If you don't need a player right there, or you like the players that you think are going to be available, 2, 3, 4 picks later, it's a good time to trade back, pick up some draft capital in next year's draft while it's cheaper, because next year's draft, when you have that 24 second, you can use that to move up and down the board in the 2024 draft when, hey, we know there's some prospects already that we're excited about.
For me at this pick, I think you touched on this really well. If you are looking to get a player instead that can maybe help you this year, similar note to above, like I said, this is the last tier before things get, or last pick in this tier before things get messy. If you don't like who's on the board, and let's say you don't want to move for Josh Jacobs, we've already mentioned him too much in this setting. But another player that I would like to target with this pick is somebody like Jahan Dotson, and then I get a 24 first on top. Again, you help yourself in 2 years, like you mentioned before. And I'd rather get a Jahan Dotson, who I think is somebody who's also kind of being slept on a little bit, valued as a, mid wide receiver 3 in most cases, but I have valued, or I have projected for more of a mid wide receiver 2 in most cases. And then you get a 24 first on top to help you again next year. You can do something similar with that pick. Get in on the Marvin Harrison, Caleb Williams, Brock Bowers sweepstakes. Either way, use that to trade up with the first you already have from other trades that you've made. And then you can really do some damage next year in next year's draft as well. That is, the cutoff of a tier. And now we kind of get into an interesting spot with the 106. What are we doing here with the 106, Nate?
Yeah, at the 106, I put here trade for Dak Prescott, because that's going to be a tough sell. Like I said before, we have a lot of people looking at Dak Prescott through the lens of the NFL, not through fantasy football. I think there might be a chance that you can move the 106 for Dak Prescott if he's someone's quarterback 3, which could be rare, but a quarterback 2 maybe for someone's team where they have a quarterback 3 that they're willing to move into their quarterback 2 spot and would like to spend this 106 on maybe a player who's dropping from that top tier. Say Will Levis goes in your top 5. All of a sudden at the 106, you might have a top player sliding down the board. You might be able to move, the 106 for Dak Prescott. You might need to add something on top of the 106, but Bob, I was told I wasn't allowed to add picks for this exercise. Yep. So while you might need to add a second to get Dak Prescott, we're going to try to just do it with the 106. Plays really well for fantasy football. He has the starting gig locked down. I don't think they're going to be moving on from him anytime soon. Let's remember, good quarterbacks usually stick around.
100%. I think to make that deal work, and I'm not going to shoot it down, I think you just need the right person. Yeah. I think you need a team that's trying to enter a rebuild. I think you need a team that really likes Will Levis or Anthony Richardson. And I think then they're basically trading 1 for 1 to get younger at a quarterback that maybe they believe in more long-term, or that just fits their trajectory that much better. And I do think that at the end of the day, you probably do need to add on more to the 106, unless they just despise Dak Prescott on a personal level.
This is a tough spot because I think the top quarterbacks, Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, are probably off the board at this point.
100%.
And if you need a quarterback, I don't feel confident in Will Levis or Anthony Richardson, especially the rookie year, giving you any production. So, this is where I want to trade for a quarterback. Dak Prescott's that top of that tier of quarterback I'm trading for at this point. But below him, it just gets so risky. I mean, there's Tua, but I'll be honest, I'm staying away from Tua with the concussions. I'm moving away from Tua this offseason wherever I can, just mitigating risk. But then after Tua, it's a long, scary list of Daniel Jones, Trey Lance, quarterbacks that I don't feel any confident. I don't have the confidence that these guys are going to be starting for the next 2-3 years like I do Dak and some of these other guys at the top. This is the point with the 106, you can't pick up not that you can't, I don't believe you can pick up a top quarterback anymore.
Yeah.
So at this point, how do you trade your 106 for a top quarterback? Because I think this is the tier where you still can squeeze that value out of this draft pick. And, maybe you don't have to add too much to it to start to acquire one of those top-ish quarterbacks. But this is the point where you're not going to go draft anymore. So if you need a quarterback, this is where you got to start flipping this pick and see what you can do.
100%. I think in general, this is a pick to, In Superflex, this is the pick that you really want to start moving out of. In one quarterback, it's more like the 104 because you're not going to have the quarterback buffer pushing some pieces down. At the 106, I think just kicks off a tier of messiness of just you're getting pretty similar level production. I did have here in my notes that Nate will say that Jordan Addison extends this top tier here, which I don't hate. I think if anything, he probably belongs in a tier of his own here. I'd like to get out of this pick, whatever you can do. 106 is just where it gets so messy. In my opinion, like I said, there's a little difference between this pick and like when you all the way down to the board to like 110, 111. So you can make a trade down there. But if you're looking for straight up players, let's say you need a running back, 106 for Najee Harris is a decent buy low right now. A guy who struggled a lot to start the year, warmed up, and finished the season on a pretty decent note, actually. So if you feel like you're a running back away or you're running back away from being at least a playoff team, you're the 106. If it is your pick, you were the 106. You likely just missed the playoffs. So Najee Harris would be a piece that could probably push you over the edge next season. Or let's say you don't feel like you're that close to the playoffs. You don't feel like you're really that close to competing. Christian Watson and a 24 first. If you want to go wide receiver, stay a little in that A, younger, and B, a player with likely more longevity in the league just because he's a wide receiver versus a running back. Then you get that 24 first on top. But, there's just so little value, in my opinion, staying at this pick in the draft right now, at least. Like I said, this could be the Jordan Addison tier, but the next pick definitely is another pick that I'll discuss and, say is another pick you should really move down from at this point. But let's get into that. Oh, go ahead and add if you want.
No, I was going to say with this next pick, Bob, with the 107, we both have the same idea here. We're just doing it two different ways.
We are.
I'm moving down just 3 spots. You're moving down 5 spots, and the difference is a little bit of compensation. So I'm moving down from the 107 to the 110. I'm going to pick up a 24 second in the process. And once again, moving down a little bit, picking up some draft capital next year's draft. Feeling good about that. Bob, you're moving down to the 112. What are you adding to make sure you get that?
I am getting a 24 first in return, and this is where I was just willing to move that little bit more back to get a little more on top with that, improve that secondary compensation piece, because I think when you look at it, even if it's, worst case scenario, it's the 112 next year as well. And let's say your 24 second ends up being the 201. Mine is still more valuable by far because it has a 1 in front of it as opposed to a 2. It's hard to go back to back. You're kind of re-rolling that pick for next year, hoping it ends up earlier. But, I was willing to move a couple slots back in this year's draft, more slots back in this year's draft to get a better pick next year, just because I feel like the difference in value there is so much that I was like, 1 to 2 players isn't probably going to be a deal breaker. Because like I think you've said in this class, in Superflex, there's probably about 13 first round picks in this class, maybe more. By the time the draft happens, there might be more players that we consider in that first round. There might be less. All right. Well, with 107 in the books, we got 108 up on the board next. I wanted to go first with this one because I have been pounding the drum for this guy all off season, and I'll continue to pound the drum for him until we get to week 1 of the NFL season and he falls flat on his face. I'm trading this 108 for TJ Hawkinson. I want to lock down my tight end room. If this is in fact your pick, you just missed the semifinals, and I'd be willing to bet that a young tight end that you could possibly use at a high level for the next 5 years is going to be a piece that gives you a competitive edge at the tight end position. And whether you're a start 8 or a start 12, a tight end being able to dominate one position every single week outside of it, unless he's going against Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce, that position's pretty much locked down more weeks than not. I believe. I think that being able to win one position at a time is kind of how you end up winning, and then having the high end assets too that can cover for bad weeks from your tight end that falls flat on his face in week 1. But I'm all about TJ Hawkinson. I think he's a value right now. I don't think enough people are in on TJ Hawkinson yet, but I digress. Nate, what are you looking to get with your 108?
Yeah, so with the 108, I think if I'm picking at the 108, I'm probably picking up a running back. I think this is a good spot for running backs in this year's draft when we kind of get into those day 2 guys. But if I don't need a running back, I'm looking to move out of the 108. I'm going to move the 108 for Treylon Burks in a 24 second. Someone else who maybe has some wide receivers and needs a running back. This is kind of a positional need trade. They're going to be trading Treylon Burks in a second for a running back they feel confident on a rookie contract. That works for their team. This works for my team. I get a wide receiver that I have a lot of belief in, has a high ceiling, as well as I get that 24 second. That way, just in case Treylon Burks falls flat on his face, I still have a 24-second where I can make up some of that value from this trade.
I love that you mentioned that, that's a big reason why I always try to add the asset, get the extra asset on top, because not only does it build up your asset pool, it also gives you insurance on that trade.
Yeah.
But with all that said, all that strategy and 108 in the books, let's talk 109, Nate. Who do you got here? It seems like a pretty good idea, I will say, what you have on the show sheet. What do you got?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was looking at the 109. Like I said, with the 108, we're looking at a running back, probably a rookie running back. Rookie running backs are fun. They don't always hit. They don't always succeed. It's a little risky. Looking at NFL talent, say you're at the 109, you're a good team. You just need some running back help. No better person to go get and acquire for quote unquote cheap coming into the 2023 season than J.K. Dobbins, who had a really good end to the season. And, coming off that injury, there has been a lot of question marks, but he's getting healthier. And now he has a full offseason to get healthy. We know how running backs look the year after their ACL injury. They always look better the year after that one. So he's going to be going into a second season out of the injury. I think big things are in store for J.K. Dobbins. Even if he doesn't stay on the Ravens long term, I think he'll still have a decent production career in his second contract. So J.K. Dobbins is a guy I'm trying to acquire. I think he's going to be able to produce for me at the running back position for the next 2 to 3 years. And before anyone gets upset that I'm going after a Ravens player, this was Bob's idea.
Yeah, thanks for throwing me under the bus with that one. So I also have the 109 for J.K. Dobbins on this deal. And as I've kind of mentioned or alluded to, you're kind of in no man's land here. Yeah. So instead of reaching on a running back or a wide receiver, I'm going to trade for one who's a pretty decent value right now. J.K. Dobbins is he's like listed around RB 16 on most platforms, or valued around there on most platforms. So right now, I think 109 for that versus whatever you're getting in your rookie draft. If you're at the 109, if that was your pick, that's a pretty solid pick person to go get, because it beefs up your running back room more than I think a running back you'll get at that spot this year will as a rookie. But let's say it isn't your pick, or you need to beef up your wide receiver room instead. This is another pick where I'm going to get Jahan Dotson, and this will be the second to last time he's mentioned on this list for me. Another guy who's just a massive buy for me this offseason, a guy I want to try to get everywhere, despite being in a quote-unquote crowded, non-super productive offense. I still want to go get Jahan Dotson because I think he's a pretty solid value for what I think he's going to end up putting up. But I'm going to let somebody else reach on a prospect here because, again, I think you're still in the middle of this tier where you're not really getting any value out of it. Either trade down a couple picks to get another pick for next year, or another pick in this draft in the second round. But let somebody else reach on this pick, in my opinion. I'll take some value with a veteran, a proven veteran. Let's talk about the 110.
Yeah, for the 110, speaking of proven veterans, I'm going to go after one of those here. I'm going to go after Amari Cooper with my 110.
Interesting.
And we're going to add on a draft pick. I'm going to try to get a 24-second once again. This is probably going to be more like a mid to late 24-second. But this is, once again, kind of a contending move. Yes. The 110, I'm picking up, not scraps at this point, but the second and third choices at running back after we've gotten through the first or second tier. And at wide receiver, there's a lot of question mark here. So at the 110, I'm a team that just missed the play, maybe the finals last year, or maybe I would trade for this pick. But using the 110 at this point, I can pick up, once again, that extra draft capital next year's draft for that 24-second, late 24-second, even if that's what it is. And I get Amari Cooper, who I think has been underrated since he came into the league. Just constantly underrated. He's put together a really impressive career. He's got Deshaun Watson coming into his own this next season, most likely with a full off season to get together, practice with Amari Cooper, because last year was a mess. I think Deshaun Watson is better than what we saw last year. So I think Amari Cooper should have a pretty good year. I think he's still got 2 to 3 more years of production at the wide receiver position, and he is being valued outside of the top 30 wide receivers right now, even though he probably put up top 20 production for at least the next 2 seasons, if I had to, guess. So this is getting a guy that, might be going into your flex spot, but could give you top, 24 wide receiver 2 numbers.
I don't hate that pick one bit. And to look at the flip side of that coin, let's say you traded for this pick, or you got into this pick with one of your other trade downs or whatever the case is, and you're more of a rebuilding squad. I'm going to talk about him for the last time here today, Jahan Dotson. If you haven't acquired him yet, you should definitely be looking into doing so. It just feels like to me that this guy is going to be the one who's super undervalued coming into next year. I don't think you could trade for him at this value next year. If that offense takes any sense of a step forward and he stays healthy for the whole season, I think we're talking about Jahan Dotson in a very different light this offseason. But next offseason, and I hate talking ifs because, ifs are, just a way to try to prop up a player that ain't that good. But if he stays healthy, if this offense can take a step forward, things could be really, really good for Jahan Dotson and just a player I believe in as a talent. We love this guy coming out last year. I think there's a way he pushes for the wide receiver one role on that team before long. You watch him, he's an electric player. And, we weren't even expecting the touchdown production, so maybe that kicks back. No. But with a full season under his belt, weekly, getting receptions and yardage, there's going to be opportunity where, touchdown regression from 11 games, still had 7 touchdowns. He's probably still going to have 7 touchdowns next year, adding more games if he's healthy. So, you can talk about that all you want, but Jahan Dotson to me is just a screaming buy at this point. And out of the rookie wide receivers from last season, I think he's the best value out of the bunch. I think everybody else is kind of, with what you're paying versus what I think you're getting, like you can get people cheaper than Jahan Dotson, but I think you're going to get much more value for him than anybody you could pick up at this pick. There's a couple players that I'm starting to think about here that I think are good values in the draft, but trading out for a veteran of sorts, a 1-year veteran, still a veteran, I'm going to pick up Jahan Dotson every chance I can at the 110.
Yeah, and I would say, with these swap deals, with the Dobbins deals, with the Jahan Dotson, and even, what you're doing here next, Bob, to continue the trend of picking up more assets, ask for a third. Why not, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Because if you can get a third, it's a dart throw. This player might end up on your taxi squad, but, get that third just so that you have another dart throw to go along with, having to trade down.
With that third you don't have to draft somebody. You can use that to move up later. You can trade that back maybe for a 24 second. If it's a 23 third, you could possibly do that. If somebody really wants to go get somebody in the third round, let them soak up the value next year. Picks are so multifaceted and that needs to be, hit on. I think, and this is kind of getting sidetracked, but again, with the theme of the video, people go into drafts, and this is looking through audits. All of our notes and audits a lot of times are, do I draft everybody? Do I trade out? Or do I just trade to next year? Do I trade for proven talent? Do I draft everybody, or do I trade out to next year? And it's like, you should never go in with a one-track mindset of to do everything, every one of your picks. All 3 of those options should always be on the table with every single draft pick you ever roster or own in a league. Let's talk about the 111, Nate. What are you doing here with the 111?
Yeah, we're trying to stretch out the value of these final first-round picks. And here, I'm going to trade down an entire round from the 111 to the 211. I'm going to try to add a 24 first in the process. That way, I continue to build up my draft capital for next year. It is quite the trade down, moving down a whole round. But this is one of those moves where we're looking towards next year. We're going to have another first to play with next year. We're going to pick up a riskier player at the 211, much more riskier than the 111, but I do like some of the dart throws that we have at the 211. I think at that point we're getting to that dart throw territory, but we're still also being able to draft some guys I feel, somewhat confident in, as day 2 draft picks in the actual NFL draft. I'm okay with making the trade all the way down around if we can pick up a first round pick.
At the 111, a lot of drafts are going to be having, and I don't know if this 6th round, I think this is kind of just hype around players right now, but we've been seeing a lot of tight ends in the first round.
Yeah.
So instead of, let's say, drafting Michael Mayer at the 111, but you still want to get a young tight end, you could flip that 111 for Pat Freiermuth, which in a lot of cases is going to feel and seem like an overpay. Pat Freiermuth, a guy I think we really like, 2 years in the league now, showed up pretty well last year, a little inconsistent, but that whole offense was kind of a mess for the most part. Pat Freiermuth coming into his 3rd season. If you're bowling on a budget and you don't want to go grab TJ Hawkinson, another great tight end in the making, in my opinion, is Pat Freiermuth. I think sooner rather than later, he cements himself as a top 6 tight end going forward in Dynasty. And, I don't really want anybody outside of the top 6 starting for my teams. They can be backups on my team. If I have, a top 6 and a top 12, one of them better be a backup because I do not feel comfortable with anybody outside of that top 6. I think Freiermuth is going to find himself there sooner rather than later. And if the tight end is the missing piece and you're thinking about reaching on Michael Mayer, throw out some offers for Pat Freiermuth first, because somebody somebody might prefer him. I like Michael Mayer long term. I think, I like a lot of tight ends in this class long term. But I think if you're looking to compete now, if the 111 was your pick, I'd rather go get somebody a little more proven at a value, more value than TJ Hawkinson. You're not getting the same level of production yet, but you might be next year. This is one where you might be, you're kind of getting in, quote unquote, on the ground floor of a high value investment. And I think Pat Freiermuth is just that, a high value investment that could push for you to lock down that tight end one spot in your leagues this year.
Yeah, I think this is a great trade because I think if you're considering Michael Mayer or Dalton Kincaid or Luke Musgrave, however it ends up being, it's a great trade to trade for Pat Freiermuth here because I think all of those players, especially Michael Mayer, you're hoping he becomes Pat Freiermuth, but here you're just going out and getting Pat Freiermuth.
Yeah, anytime I think you could make that deal of, I could draft this guy and I hope he ends up being Pat Freiermuth. Try throwing that pick out for that player first. And I mean, obviously you're not going to do that with like a Justin Jefferson, and things like that. But when you get to this point in the draft, when you're drafting somebody and you have that, ideation for them, like I think you can make the same case for, let's say at the 110, you hope Josh Downs is Jahan Dotson.
Exactly.
Similar-ish players.
Dotson.
Exactly. You're a little older there, but you're getting a player that we know has already performed in the NFL. And I think there's some serious value in that. What are we going to do with this 112? We're the championship team, let's say, or maybe we got it, rebuilding wise. What are we doing with this 112?
This is something I've been preaching all off season. This is what I preached throughout the season as well. And it is, hey, at this point, we're going to be moving this pick for whatever 24 first we can get. Let's just push it back a year. We'll take the 2024 first. If you can get a 24 first and say a third, or something I did like in my last pick when I moved down into like the late second, maybe you move into the late third and you keep a draft pick in this year, but you acquire that 24 first for next year. And I'm not really concerned about what I get on top of this 2024 first, because as long as it becomes a top 9 pick, let's say, in next year's draft, I think I've made up pretty well moving back a year. Even if it does become the 112, I postponed myself for 1 year and I've lost a little bit of value, sure. But the chances of this becoming a better pick are just about guaranteed. I mean, it's 11 out of 12 that becomes a better pick than the 112. And I think hey, we always say next year's class is exciting. Next year's class is probably going to look pretty similar to this class depth-wise. So anything I get, top 9, top 8 pick, I've made up really well. Say that the 24 first becomes a mid 24 first, even like the 105. I mean, you'll be looking back next year at thinking you made like the best trade of the year.
Yeah. And I think another thing that, I have the same exact trade as you. I think that's probably the best value you're going to get for this pick this year. I think something you can do, you can go push for somebody like a Christian Kirk, but take advantage of somebody's favorite player falling down the board because it's going to happen. There's going to be Quentin Johnson's going to be here in some drafts. People love Keyshawn Butte is going to be here in some drafts. Zach Evans is probably going to be here in some drafts. Just a few names that are definitely going to be here in this draft. If you are not dead set with a solid conviction on those players, trading out to 2024 for a random first, you get to re-roll that pick for a better pick next year. And even if you don't want to keep that pick next year, let's say that pick is looking like a later pick come the trade deadline. Now you can use that pick to go invest into a high-level player that can help you win your league this year. That pick becomes infinitely more valuable as a competitive piece later in the season because you traded it away for a 24 first next year. And I think that's just good strategy at that point. That's just good process in building a team and building a championship roster. So you can have the 112 again and do it again next year.